Well, hello people, and welcome back to episode 3 of Project Skylines. I hope you're having a wonderful day. We are recreating Knox Country from the game Project Zomboid in Cities 2, and last episode we created March Ridge that lies on the eastern edges of the first episode, Rosewood. So far, the map is pretty convincing and translating much better than I ever anticipated into Cities 2. And today we're heading into the enormous Doe Valley, a huge farm space with a couple of towns around here, including Fallas Lake, which is aptly named because there's a lake here in the shape of cock. So we'll deal with that at some point today as well. So let's tackle the Doe Valley and Fallas Lake, shall we? So apologies for the delay between the March Ridge episode and this one. I was buying a house, but now things should be a little bit more consistent again. We'll start by opening up loads of tiles here. We also end up buying a few more come the end of the episode. This area is enormous and has so far proven to have been the most difficult bit of the project. There's tons of stuff out here: farmsteads, animal farms, ice cream shops, warehouses, military barracks, 2 towns, and tons more in between. Such a huge space to fill here. And I'd also love to know, for those that play Zomboid, let me know where you base up if you play in the Doe Valley. Fallas Lake is one of my favourite base locations, especially the gas station there. But let me know in the comments below where you base up here. But let's get our roads down, and then we can start turning our attention towards some of the finer field detailing, which there is plenty of. The surface work at this point is beginning to feel a little bit like a paint by numbers, surprisingly therapeutic sketching out with the image overlay. And to touch on the image overlay mod, certainly a mod I've overlooked previously, and I think something that a project like Ilos would have massively benefited from. I think for heavily inspired by or full recreation projects, this mod's pretty crucial. So certainly expect to see it in future egg projects now that I'm aware of it, and just how useful it can be. I mentioned in the first episode how important this overlay is for the project, and never has that been more evident than using it for the Doe Valley fields. I was starting to get pretty sick of the surface work here, but then I remembered at some point I'm going to be in Louisville, and I imagine I'll wish I was doing Doe Valley field work then, so that kind of helped me enjoy it a little bit more. There's lots of really different interesting field configurations here, different shapes, sizes and textures, but especially the little rectangular fields as well. These things were quite difficult to use, but Sully's Riverbed thin. It really helped achieve the vibe that I was after with these. And thankfully the wonderful map maker Poplar Ponderosa had already put down some larger fields for us, so at least a dent had already been made in the vast countryside that makes up the Doe Valley. We have had quite a few comments asking if I'm going to use real working farms. I will occasionally, just so we can see the visual of tractors moving around. But a lot of the time those farms are much bigger than the space I have to play with on this map, so I will use them occasionally, just not all the time. We've also had a lot of comments saying that it's Knox County. It used to be, they changed it in build 42, it is now Knox Country. But before you leave me a comment saying that, it is definitely Knox Country now. You are right, it did used to be county, but they changed it when they added the launch map in one of the build 42 branches. Now come on to tackle these rectangular fields. I'm not quite sure what these are from I guess an agriculture perspective. But because we can't do shapes like this, we're just going to layer together several different surfaces, which does a pretty convincing job. These are pretty subtle patterns from the satellite view, but we did manage to get them in. And if you don't walk away from this episode feeling inspired for field designs, then I've failed in this video. And we're now starting to see something that's beginning to resemble Doe Valley. With most of the countryside in, I wanted to turn my attention to handling the Fallus. Here there's some basic parks, a gazebo, a little fountain, a community centre and a church. Now previously in other episodes we've used the fire station as the church, but it's too big for this space. So I ended up settling on a couple of UK elementary school sub-buildings spliced together, which gave us a pretty convincing kind of local small town church aesthetic. Especially with a bit of fencing, pathwork around it. Ended up quite convincing this place. Now onto the main street, placing the bar and what I think is a laundromat. Some really fun parking configurations and fence work all the way down the main street in Fallas Lake, especially around the back of the farm shop where the gun store is. I also add the mod the colour variation changer to stop our fences from changing colour, so bear with that just for a little bit. I add it a little bit later on in this episode. For the bookstore I decided to go with one of the arts and crafts unique buildings and ended up placing another police station. It is slightly bigger than the one here in Fallas Lake, but of course I do want services from the city's Skylines simulation perspective to be present in the town. Although we are using modular block services now, so this shouldn't be too much of a problem going forward in the series. There's no overly stylized farm buildings in CS2 just yet. The game really hasn't had a countryside pack or release in any form. So northeast commercial with some trees and other farm props around it to help create the look that we see on Main Street, Fallas Lake. We also pop the hardware store down on the end of the street and expand the car parking around this to fill what we see in Knox Country. The other side of the main street, there's kind of a motel, almost country house sort of building here, which one of the European motel works well, with a pathway behind it linking into a shed by the lake. And I think there's a general goods store here alongside a restaurant that then bleeds into the petrol station right at the edge of the town. This cinematic right here just reminded me so much of breaking into the back of these shops to come and loot them. And we even had a Zomboid style van spawn out one at the back of them, which was just amazing. Continued by more surface work all along the edges of Main Street Fallas Lake. Gas station configurations, again, nothing we haven't seen before, although we do end up using different configurations in the other town we'll cover a bit later on. But two European little gas stations sandwiched together, usually with a motel building, kind of gives you the vibe you're after for most of the Zomboid gas stations. Another wonderful example of just how well this project seems to be translating into CS2 and its asset pool. And then finally add in what I think is like a burger restaurant here, just a general fast food place on the edge of town. With some really nice, wonderful, inspiring car park configurations at the front. If there's one thing I'm walking away from this project with, it's how to configure car parks against buildings. Quite realistically, Zomboid is just such good inspiration for city skylines as it turns out. Who would have thought that? And now with most of Main Street in, we can start to see the very small town of Fallas Lake begin to take shape. With the buildings in, time to turn our attention towards all of the residential, all single family, usually single story homes in this bit of the city. And then some final service work around the community centre, which is two Southwest Fire Station sub-buildings. And then another tinier, more designed farmstead lying on the very southern edge of Fallas Lake. I also wanted to hook these roads into the Mordra arterial, which will eventually host the town of Mordra, but just so they don't always have to go through the Rosewood March Ridge intersection. Also upgrading some of the alleyway roads in the middle of the Doe Valley to be highway roads, and then bringing the rural power pole through the middle of Fallas Lake, which is really starting to take shape now, isn't it? One of my favourite things from this project is the aesthetic of wooden power lines down the main street. Severely underrated. For lack of a better phrase, with the Fallus beginning to take shape, decided to return to some of the countryside. Mentioned at the start of the episode, there is so many things out here. There's a triple food warehouse, quite a popular loot location. Great for any compost also in the mid to late game if you find yourself needing tons of rotting food. These places will be full of them. But there's army barracks out here, kind of random workers, residential. There's an ice cream parlor, which we'll get to a bit later on, which might be one of my favourite bits of the episode actually. Using the static ploppables mod here to place in some non-functioning warehouses, and we do however begin to place some functioning industry. Just referencing the CS2 simulation again, I want to make sure the people here actually have jobs to go to, and there is some form of production chain, although it will likely fall away I imagine with all the plopping, but we'll see if we can keep it as realistic as possible. There is a repeated barrack out here, for which some of the pumping station sub-buildings give the perfect visual, moving them a little bit closer together to create those alleyways, and then some more functioning industry here, just to help keep the supply chains alive. Plenty more farmsteads tucked in the fields with multiple barns and well-trodden path details to also bring into the area. Again, huge shout out to Sully for his riverbed thin. Probably one of the most crucial assets we've actually got in the mod list for this. With some more little warehouse districts tucked in amongst all of these fields. And if you have made it this far into the video, don't forget to leave me that zombie emoji down in the comments below for those that didn't. We now come across a little army barracks installation. There's no road here, so I'm having to go with static ploppables because otherwise the buildings won't work. But just very small single-story homes and a bit more of a kind of barracks quarters, kind of L-shaped building on the corner. Tried to use some of the Japanese, but ended up settling on just a splicing of Chinese residential, which came out pretty well. And then we also used recolor just to bring them all into the same design. This is another great example of how such unique and quite strange inspiration Zomboid provides you with. Never would I have thought of piecing together static ploppables like this, but a glance at Knox Country allows you to use some assets in very different ways. Back to more of these rectangular fields. Let me know if you know what these actually are down in the comments below for those of you into farming. They're pretty subtle, but you can tell they're there. With plenty more farmsteads and warehouse configurations to be had all across the Doe Valley. Some more residential going in, and so far with countryside and 2 towns in, Knox Country sits at just over 1600 population. There's also more personal farms present within a lot of these farmsteads, places for smaller crops rather than full agricultural fields. Now we'll return to the town in the very west. Now on the map, this town doesn't have a name. There is, however, a gun store, a pharmacy and a gas station here, so a pretty useful loot location for Zomboid players. And let me know if you base up here. I think I visited once or twice just for the gun store. But on the map it's just referenced as Farmer's Market, so I don't really have a name for this one. But we'll also connect all the roads coming through here into the arterial system heading west out of Rosewood, and carrying on sketching our initial frames. It's also quite scary to realise that this isn't even the biggest fields. The most farmland lies kind of north of Irvington, so this isn't even as intense as the services will get. Bringing in some roads now to hold our first initial buildings, and this little space in the middle with the gas station and the auto repair shop turns out super nicely. Sketching in some surfaces just to give that concrete foundation. I do place in a static ploppable but end up changing this out for an actual functioning building, and then combining a motel with a couple of gas station units to replicate what we see here on the map. Another point as to how cool some of the car parking configurations in Zomboid can be. Just 2 parking roads sandwiched in between a single commercial building, with the usual selection of single-storey homes plopped around the orbit of this little town centre. Same thing here again, using some parking roads to configure the commercial. I think this is where the food market and the pharmacy are, if my Zomboid knowledge is correct. With some prop replication here as well, with a dumpster present behind the food store, and then a single commercial building to replicate the gun store present here too. With this in, we also come across another little substation. These are also proving to be one of my favourite little things to add. Using the Japanese tool sheds with a couple of benches and a bin to replicate exactly what we see here in Knox Country. Another thing I'm really enjoying from Project Skylines is substation detailing. So these little details that you don't really think about when building your own cities, but these replication projects are always so much fun finding little details like this. We also continue to add more of the surfaces that are present on the edge of this very western town, which is lots more of the usual fields, small homes, sheds and little private farms in the orbit of these smaller towns. We also had some questions on the eventual Louisville episodes. Currently we're quite far from that, but I'm envisioning we'll probably break Louisville up into 4 or 5 separate episodes, quarters or fifths, breaking apart the capital city. But we'll decide what we're going to do with that as we move closer to the city. Some fun little checkerboard patchwork fields going in too, with tons of well-trodden dirt path all in between them. With most of the field work starting to take shape, it was time to scatter some tree lines in between them, where you would expect these agricultural lands to be demarcated, and then our final few farmsteads also going in. There's just so many of them, these little dirt road offshoots. Something I would never really do with residential outside of a project like this, but again, just great inspiration for city infrastructure. On the very eastern edge of Fallas Lake here, there's another little triple warehouse configuration and some smaller homes, with more kind of well-trodden used field rather than full agricultural field, so trying to differentiate different services through this space, just to try and show how each of the fields aren't all the same colour or size. There's also a massive farm here present with multiple little farm buildings and 3 or 4 houses, with lots of personal little private farm space behind them. Definitely one of the more challenging bits of the Doe Valley this, especially with all the fence configurations. But nothing too challenging, nothing out of the realms of the CS2 asset pool. The agricultural static ploppables work really nicely for just giving us some sort of farm outhouse buildings, with some further fence work just to give them that property boundary, if you like. Some of the driveways at the front of these houses kind of almost have like a concrete extension out the front of them. We'll just use the surfaces already present on the houses to replicate this, with more fence work to give them their own boundary. It's behind the main farmhouse we find a much more elaborate fence and pathway system, almost like you can imagine the farmer is walking between all of these little individual enclosures. On a related note, also a great base if you want to kind of really lean into the livestock abilities of Build 42, given the fact you've got all this preset fence work. Please, someone come and save me from these fields. I'm going to go insane. With more farmstead and warehouse configurations present everywhere, it seems. Every time I make one of these things, I look back at the map and there's still just as many left to do. Please, someone send help. I'm not joking. We now return to the northern edge of Fallas Lake. This will eventually be the road and rail to Riverside, which I think will be next episode. We'll get into the town of Riverside. There's some fun little level crossing configurations here, and once we get to Muldra, where the train yard is, we will actually see trains flowing through Knox County, which of course isn't something you see at all in Zomboid. And there's also some more quite misshapen and much different sized fields on this bit of Fallas Lake as well, so adding these where they're needed. There's something very unique about Knox Country being built out of 90 and 45-degree angles. We now come on to the ice cream parlor, which is a really fun bit of Doe Valley, some gravel car parks going in and a couple of European commercial buildings, so it does function and sims will be drawn here. There's some great detailing to pick out, including exactly 3 picnic benches and a little child's playground that sits just behind the ice cream parlor itself, right out here in the country. Really fun way to use some of the props inspired by Project Zomboid. And then there's also an animal farm. I'm guessing it's the dairy farm that feeds the ice cream parlor is probably the vibe here. So some more agricultural static ploppables with fencing, surfaces and trees go a long way to helping us achieve this aesthetic. There's also a hay barn out here with a well-trodden sand path if anything rather than dirt, so also added this into the area as well. As the Doe Valley comes to a close, some final tree work and farmsteads that are lingering on the very edges of the valley to really help tie things all together. If anything, I hope you walk away from such a unique project like this feeling inspired on how to use such basic assets like single home, single story residential. Even out here on its own at the end of a dirt path, it gives off such a vibe, doesn't it? Which gives us a mostly finished Doe Valley and something that looks a little bit like this. Thank you all so much indeed for watching. If you have enjoyed it, likes, comments and shares below really help out. Definitely the most challenging episode of the project so far. This was such a massive space to fill, so if you have enjoyed it, don't forget to let me know down in the comments. Loads of fields, farms, warehouses, 2 towns, gas stations, and just so much more in between. Super inspiring bit of Knox Country to take inspiration from. Massive shout out to the YouTube members and patrons that support these videos with a roll call to our Golden Egg patrons. Bad Wolf, Casino, Great C, Jamin, Louis Adlam, Michael W, Phoenix MD and Spartan Angel. If you want to get involved in that, there's podcasts and early access and loads more over on the Patreon, and check out Instant Gaming for great deals on all your favourite games, so it's help directly support the work we do here. Next time I'll see you in Riverside, but otherwise I'll thank you all so much for watching, and as always, enjoy the rest of your day.